In 1997, Apple Computer had 90 days of cash left. 90 days. After that, the money ran out. The company that had once defined personal computing was 3 months away from bankruptcy. Its products were a mess. Its stock had fallen 80% from its peak. Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, was asked what he would do if he ran Apple. He said he would shut it down and give the money back to shareholders. That was Apple in 1997. Today, Apple is worth approximately $3 trillion. It is the most valuable company in the history of human commerce. It sells more iPhones in a single quarter than there are people in France. Its customers are the most loyal of any brand on Earth. More loyal than any car brand, any fashion brand, any technology company that has ever existed. And here is the thing most people never think about. Your iPhone works perfectly fine. The one you have right now. The camera is extraordinary. The speed is more than you need. The apps all run. Nothing is broken. And you are already thinking about the next one. That is not an accident. That is not weakness. That is one of the most sophisticated psychological systems ever built by a corporation, designed specifically to make a $1,000 purchase feel not just reasonable, but necessary. And the story of how Apple built that system starts not with a phone, not with a computer. It starts with a garage in Los Altos, California in 1976, and 2 young men who believed that technology should be personal. Steve Jobs was 21 years old in 1976. Steve Wozniak was 25. Wozniak was the engineer, a genuine genius who could build computers from scratch in ways that nobody else in the industry could match. Jobs was something else entirely. Not an engineer, not a coder, not a technical person in any conventional sense. Jobs was someone who understood what technology could feel like to a person who was not a technical person. He understood that computers were not just machines, they were tools for human creativity, human expression, human potential. And he was obsessed from the very beginning with the idea that technology should be beautiful, not functional, beautiful, not adequate, extraordinary. They built the first Apple computer in Jobs' parents' garage in Los Altos, sold it for $666.66. Built another, sold that too. The Apple II followed in 1977, the first mass-market personal computer with color graphics, the machine that put Apple on the map and made both men millionaires before they were 30. By 1980, Apple went public. It was the largest IPO since Ford in 1956. Jobs was worth $256 million at 25 years old. But here is where the story gets complicated. In 1983, Jobs recruited John Sculley from PepsiCo to be Apple's CEO. The pitch Jobs made to Sculley is one of the most famous lines in business history. He looked at Sculley and said, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley came. 2 years later, in 1985, the Apple board sided with Sculley over Jobs in a power struggle about the direction of the company. Jobs was stripped of his responsibilities. Then he was pushed out entirely. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the company he had founded, the company he had built, the company that existed because of him. He was 30 years old. He described it later as devastating, like being publicly disgraced. The thing he had built his entire identity around, gone. The thing that gave his life meaning, taken from him by the people he had hired. He bought a small animation studio from George Lucas for $5 million. It would later become Pixar. he started a new computer company called Next. And for 12 years, he watched Apple from the outside as it slowly, steadily, almost completely fell apart without him. Apple without Jobs was a company that had lost the thing that made it Apple. Not the engineers, not the products, not the distribution. It had all of those. What it lost was the obsessive, unreasonable insistence that everything had to be not just good, but extraordinary. The willingness to throw away a year of work because something was not quite right. The belief that the person using the product deserved to have it be beautiful, not merely functional. Without that, without Jobs, Apple made products that were fine, adequate, technically competent, and completely forgettable. By 1997, they had lost. The products were a disaster. The strategy was incoherent. The stock was worthless. The cash was almost gone. And then Apple bought Next, Jobs' company, for $427 million. And Jobs came back. Jobs walked back into Apple in 1997 with 90 days of cash and a company in complete chaos. His first move was to call Bill Gates and negotiate a $150 million investment from Microsoft. The crowd at the Apple Developer Conference booed when Microsoft's logo appeared on screen behind Jobs. Jobs told them to get over it. He needed the money. His second move was to cut Apple's product line from 350 products to 10. 350 products reduced to 10. Everything that was not essential, eliminated. Every resource, every engineer, every dollar focused on doing fewer things with complete excellence, rather than many things with adequate mediocrity. His third move was to bring in a design team led by a young British designer named Johnny Ive and give him a mandate that almost no executive in the history of business had ever given a designer. Make it beautiful first. Make it functional second. Not because beauty was more important than function, but because Jobs understood something that most technology companies had never figured out. If it is beautiful, people will believe it works better. If it is beautiful, people will want to own it before they know what it does. If it is beautiful, the act of using it becomes something people feel good about rather than something they merely do. This was not aesthetics. This was psychology. In 1998, Apple released the iMac. It was a computer that came in colors: translucent plastic in bondy blue, grape, tangerine, strawberry, lime. At a time when every computer on Earth was beige, uniformly, universally, inescapably beige. The iMac was not more powerful than its competitors. It was not significantly faster. It was not technically superior in any way that a specification sheet would reveal. But it was beautiful. And it felt like yours, not like a machine you used, like an object you chose. It saved Apple. First profitable quarter in years, stock began recovering. The company breathed again. But the iMac was just the beginning. What came next was the insight that changed everything. Jobs understood that Apple was not in the computer business. Apple was not even in the technology business. Apple was in the identity business. When you bought an Apple product, you were not buying a computer or a phone or a music player. You were buying a statement about who you were. You were buying membership in a group of people who believed that design mattered, that creativity mattered, that the tools you used should reflect the quality of the thinking you did with them. Apple products were not for everyone. They were specifically, deliberately, and intentionally not for everyone. The famous 1984 advertisement, widely considered the greatest television commercial ever made, showed Apple as the rebel against conformity. The Think Different campaign in 1997 showed Einstein and Gandhi and Picasso and Martin Luther King and asked you to see yourself alongside them. Apple was not selling you a machine. It was telling you who you were. In 2001, Apple released the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket. That was the pitch. Not gigabytes, not storage specifications. 1,000 songs. A human number, not a technical one. The language of someone who understood that people did not care about gigabytes. They cared about their music. But the iPod was not what changed Apple forever. What changed Apple forever was iTunes. iTunes was a software ecosystem that connected the iPod to a store where you could legally buy individual songs for 99 cents. Before iTunes, music was either purchased as a full album or pirated. iTunes gave people a third option: legal, simple, individual, cheap. This was the moment Apple stopped being a hardware company and became something far more powerful: an ecosystem. Once you had an iPod, you had iTunes. Once you had iTunes, you had a library. Once you had a library, switching to a different music player meant losing your library, or at minimum, the friction of moving it. You were not locked in by contract or by price. You were locked in by the accumulated investment of your own time and choices. This mechanism, the ecosystem lock-in, would become the most powerful business weapon Apple ever built. More powerful than any individual product. More powerful than any marketing campaign. More powerful than any technology advantage. Because it meant that every Apple product you bought made it slightly harder to leave and slightly more natural to buy the next one. On January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage at the Moscone Center in San Francisco and said he was going to introduce 3 revolutionary products: an iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, a breakthrough internet communications device. The crowd applauded 3 times. Then he said, "These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone." The iPhone was not the first smartphone. Research in Motion had the BlackBerry. Nokia had been making internet-capable phones for years. Microsoft had Windows Mobile. But none of them had understood what Jobs understood. A smartphone was not a phone with extra features. It was a computer in your pocket. And if it was a computer in your pocket, it should be as beautiful and as intuitive and as emotionally resonant as any other Apple product. The original iPhone had no physical keyboard. Every other smartphone had a physical keyboard. The BlackBerry's physical keyboard was considered its greatest strength, the reason serious business people chose it over anything else. Jobs eliminated the keyboard entirely and replaced it with a touchscreen, not because it was technically superior, because it was more elegant, because a screen that could be anything was more beautiful than a keyboard that could only ever be a keyboard. Nokia's CEO at the time said the iPhone would never work without a physical keyboard. BlackBerry's founders thought it was a toy. Within 3 years, the BlackBerry was irrelevant. Within 5 years, Nokia had sold its mobile phone division. Within 10 years, the iPhone was the most profitable single product in the history of human commerce. Here's the question at the center of this entire story. Your iPhone works perfectly, so why do you upgrade it? The honest answer is that you upgrade it because Apple has built one of the most sophisticated psychological systems ever created for generating desire in a product that you already own a perfectly functional version of. It works through 5 specific mechanisms: and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The first is the annual event. Every September, Apple holds a product launch event that is covered by every major media outlet on Earth, as if it were news. It is not news in the conventional sense. Apple is releasing a new phone, as it does every year, as it has done every year since 2007. But the event creates cultural momentum. By the time the phone is announced, the conversation has been building for weeks. By the time it is available, millions of people feel behind if they do not have it yet. The second is the incremental upgrade. Each iPhone is meaningfully better than the one before it, but only in specific ways that are heavily marketed. The camera, the chip speed, the battery life. The improvements are real, but they are calibrated. Not so large that people feel they missed everything by not upgrading, but significant enough that people feel they are missing something by not upgrading. The gap is engineered. The third is the feature removal. Apple periodically removes something from the iPhone, the headphone jack in 2016 being the most famous example, and the removal forces the ecosystem to adapt. When the headphone jack disappeared, the AirPods appeared. When the AirPods appeared, the seamless connection between AirPods and iPhone created a new reason to stay in the Apple ecosystem. The removal of a feature created the demand for a new product. The fourth is the software cutoff. Older iPhones eventually stop receiving the latest iOS updates. When your phone stops getting updates, it becomes slightly slower, slightly less compatible, slightly less capable. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just gradually, quietly, persistently less useful than the current model. The phone you own becomes incrementally inadequate, not because it broke, but because the software ecosystem moved without it. The fifth is the identity signal. An iPhone is a visible object. People see it when you take it out. An old iPhone model is identifiable. A new iPhone model is identifiable. In a culture where what you carry signals who you are, an older phone model communicates something, accurately or not, about where you stand. This is not rational. Apple did not invent human status signaling, but Apple understood it and built a product that participates in it at the highest level. These 5 mechanisms working simultaneously produce an upgrade cycle that is not driven by necessity or even by rational desire, but by a carefully constructed feeling that the current version of your life is slightly incomplete without the new one. But the upgrade cycle is only one layer. The deeper mechanism is the ecosystem. Every Apple product you own makes every other Apple product more useful. Your iPhone pairs seamlessly with your AirPods. Your AirPods connect instantly to your MacBook. Your MacBook shares files effortlessly with your iPad. Your iPad picks up the call from your iPhone. Everything talks to everything. Everything works with everything. The experience of using all of them together is genuinely better than using any of them separately. And every time you buy one more Apple product, the cost of leaving becomes higher. Not because Apple charges you to leave, not because there is a contract, but because your photos are in iCloud, your messages are in iMessage, your music is in Apple Music, your passwords are in iCloud Keychain, your health data is in Apple Health, your payment information is in Apple Pay. The switch to Android is technically free, but it costs you your photos, your messages, your music library, your passwords, your health history, your payment setup, your app purchases, and the seamless connection between every device you own. Most people will never pay that price. Apple understood from the iPod era that the most powerful lock-in is not a contract. It is the accumulated weight of your own life stored inside their products. But even Apple, even with all of this, has come close to losing it. In 2013, Samsung released the Galaxy S4, and for the first time, Android phones were genuinely competitive with the iPhone on every technical specification: screen size, camera quality, processing speed, customization. Android gave users things Apple deliberately refused to give: widgets, default app changes, the ability to modify the operating system itself. For 2 years, Apple's growth slowed. The premium smartphone market felt genuinely contested for the first time. Within Apple, there were real conversations about whether the premium pricing could hold, whether the loyalty would survive genuine competition, whether the ecosystem lock-in was enough. The answer came in 2014 with the iPhone 6, the biggest screen Apple had ever made, the thing customers had been asking for years that Apple had resisted for years. Jobs had famously dismissed large phones. He believed a phone should be usable with one hand. But Jobs was gone. Tim Cook listened to what customers were telling him. The iPhone 6 was the best-selling iPhone in history at the time of its release. Apple's growth accelerated, the loyalty held, the ecosystem held. Because the 5 mechanisms and the ecosystem lock-in had done their work so thoroughly that even a period of genuine competitive pressure could not break what had been built. Here is what the story of Apple actually teaches. The most valuable thing a company can build is not a product. It is a world. McDonald's built a world where the real estate was the business and the burger was the mechanism. Nike built a world where the athlete was the product and the shoe was the medium. Starbucks built a world where belonging was the product and the coffee was the vehicle. Apple built a world where identity was the product and the technology was the canvas. You do not buy an iPhone. You buy a version of yourself that uses an iPhone. You buy membership in a group of people who care about design, who value creativity, who believe that the tools you use should be as carefully made as the work you do with them.